Um, yeah, so maybe we can do that. So I'll go fast, and then maybe you, Joe, and Stephen and Christine can also introduce yourselves, and the others who are also going to speak this afternoon. My name is Onesmus Mwabonje. I'm a senior research fellow here at the Center for Environmental Policy at Imperial College London. I also lead the project that you're all that has brought us here today. My background is in life cycle assessment. That's what I do, and I've been teaching this afternoon some of my MSc students life cycle assessment. Over to you, Joe.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Joe Lindsay Walton. I'm a principal research fellow in arts, climate and technology at the Sussex Digital Humanities Lab. And I'm also part of the project Sustainable AI Futures, which is collaborating with applied African speculative fiction. And I'll be talking about that in just a little bit.
Yeah, Christine, you want to introduce yourself as well and mute?
Yes, that's fine. So I'm Christine Icardi. I am a senior research fellow in science and technology studies at King's College London, where I work both for the Department of Informatics and for the School of Biomedical Engineering. Yes, and I've been working with Stephen for almost 10 years now on trying to use science fiction to yes, for provocations to and for trying to make better anticipation of the implications of science and technology that is still in the lab and discuss it around society in the future, so that in many different projects we have been working together by now. So yeah, that's me, social scientist.
Thanks, Christine. Over to you, Stephen.
Hello, so I'm Stephen Oram. I'm a speculative fiction writer, mainly stuff that's set in the near future. And I won't repeat everything Christine said, but we have been working together on this applied sci-fi stuff for almost 10 years. So that's me. The other thing that tends to creep in is that I was a civil servant for quite a few years, heading up a policy team. So there's a little bit of bureaucrat and/or cynical bureaucrat creeps in every now and again.
Thanks. Gabrielle, do you want to go introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Gabrielle Imam Hari. I'm a writer of speculative fiction. I write fantasy, horror, sci-fi, everything. And I've kind of been advising on the project for a couple of months, just giving my inputs, and I'm working right now on curating the toolkits which will accompany this project. Super excited to meet all of you and hear from you today.
Thank you. So we'll I don't know if I've left anybody out who is speaking, but perhaps when it comes to their turn, they can do a quick intro. So for the sake of time, we will trot on. So I will talk a little bit about the project as conceived here at Imperial. The Applied African Science Fiction is funded by a seed fund from Imperial College, but this is in collaboration with our colleagues from University of Nairobi, also with the African Speculative Fiction Society, Vector, and also the new project that is being led by Braid, by Joe, called Braid. Maybe you will talk a little bit more, Joe, when it comes to that. And the aim here is to be able to create educational resources, so to use science fiction as part of the pedagogical approaches for STEM As you all know, Imperial College is very much STEM oriented. We want to use this platform to be able to change that, but also do the same with other institutions in Africa, starting with Nairobi and others. Next slide, please. So the idea here is to be able to assemble online resource that would not just be beneficial for the student body, but also for the teaching body in terms of teaching STEM subjects. I should actually say STEM B, because Imperial is a STEM B institution. So to create new stories, to create new stories with the aim of using within our classrooms. We have accepted at the moment 11 proposals, twice as many as we had actually planned. We have 3 stories from 3 proposals from Kenya, 3 proposals from Nigeria. We have 4 from South Africa, 1 from Tanzania, Australia writer. We are also printing 5 stories already written and published by writers from the diaspora, Uganda, and also Nigeria. Next slide, please. So we had a the call for proposal. We invited African writers to collaborate with scientists to write these stories that could be used within the STEM setup, especially at the university level. We are looking for stories that will provoke, create debate about ethics, also about politics within the research arena. Look at environmental technology, climate repatriation, and also progressive legislature, policy, history and philosophy of science, and even many more. There are some inspiration that we can draw from Joe's work on applied speculative resources within Vector, which is also a resource that is available for us. Next slide, please. Here we intend to make sure that the stories that we are writing within limits, they are open source and they are available. And we have been invited to submit a proposal to an open source book by MIT Press, but we also have an alternative approach where we can also publish with Pink Press, which is a press that was set up by Joe and the University of Sussex. So we are looking at these stories to have a length of between 1,000 words and 5,000 words. That sort of flexibility. Each writer will receive a small token from us of £250 per story. Of course, the details will also be provided to individuals separately. The key themes we are looking at, or the proposals that we've received, revolve around AI and sustainability. We also have proposals that reflect on climate and biodiversity. That sort of mixture is what we are also looking at. Next slide. We have a number of writers with new stories. I see Muna has just joined. We have a number of writers with new stories. Mwende Ngao, Kimemia Macharia, these are from Kenya. Amanda Nechesa, Onshon, Itse Yamu, Chinelo Onwalo, Ada Nadi, Nerindo Doman, Stephen Embleton, these are South Africans, Robin Peros, and Eugene Bacon, who is a Tanzanian Australian. The researchers that will be involved, maybe we will have more researchers also, depending on the topics that are written, the stories that are written. Myself, Paulina, who is on the call as well, Robin Lamble, who is a colleague here at Imperial, Joe from Sussex, Michelle Wahome from UCL, Masimboru and Florence Okoye from Natural History Museum. We have Stella Nyamburambao from Jomo Kenyatta, and Muna Hohari and Blaise Kaye as well. And we'll also have people from all sorts of expertise, looking at climate, AI, water, agriculture, economics, STS. I think Christine will talk a bit about STS shortly, and environmental justice. Next slide, please. And here is a snippet of the process. Researchers to consider questions of interest within STEM education, and how can stories bring STS to STEM classrooms. So that's a question for us researchers to consider as we work with them, with the writers in this space. So examples are what we have actually done with University of Nairobi and Imperial under the small group seminars. Some materials are also available on the Vector website on this. Next slide. I think here I hand over to you, Christine.
Thank you. So yes, just a few words about science and technology studies. And in preamble, I want to make a disclaimer, and it is that there is very much a lack of agreement on the definition of what science and technology studies consist in, which is to be expected because it's a very interdisciplinary field of research, and also because its global diffusion remains very unequal across countries and continents. And it must be said that it still remains strongly anchored in the English-speaking world, so Anglo-American world, very much. So, for instance, there is no such thing as STS in my country, which is France. It's not a field of research that is recognized as having any existence in France. So I'm still going to use a definition, and I will use a definition that was, of STS. That's from the latest edition of the Handbook of Science and Technology Studies, which is the 4th edition from 2017, which is a sort of textbook handbook, which is widely used in STS teaching and research, because usually it reflects the state of the art of the field at the time of its publication, more or less, which now is already like 8 years old, and the new one is in preparation, but not still out. So the handbook starts from the observation that we live in a world in which the technosciences in the plural have become a dominant mode of knowledge making, with wide-ranging material and conceptual consequences. And this is even more the case if you take into account the fact that the technology we currently live with very seldom stands on its own, but is usually embedded in large socio-technical systems that can bring together people, institutions, various technological bits, practices, processes, governance, and more. And so the introduction to the handbook pursues STS is an interdisciplinary field that investigates the institutions, practices, meanings, and outcomes of science and technology, and their multiple entanglements with the worlds that people inhabit, their lives and their values. People do construct and perform science and technology, but at the same time, and this is an STS perspective, STS emphasizes that in the process of making science and technology, people are also making and remaking themselves, their bodies, their identities, their societies, and their material surroundings. And for me, this definition highlights implicitly the value that STS places on critical, future-oriented thinking. And especially so because actually, as stated in a later chapter of the handbook, which is dedicated to performing and governing the future in science and technology, the practices of science and technology are completely saturated with expectations and promises and prospective claims, which do require some attention because they have a certain capacity to mobilize people and resources and funding and imaginations in the present. And if you take into account this potential performativity in the present of future visions, this adds a deeper meaning and urgency to the question that was raised by Wole Talabi, and I'm sorry if I really mispronounce his name, which was appearing on the first quote that Onesmus was presenting, which really was quoted at the start of the presentation as motivating and framing the whole project. And the question was, where in Africa is the critical science fiction ecosystem of writers, scientists, directors, engineers, editors, and futurists who are interacting with and learning from each other? So I think this sort of chimes with this STS definition and perspective I've just introduced. And I think I'm handing over to someone else, but I don't know who after this slide.
Yeah, so maybe that's me. Yeah, so thanks, Christine. So there's some useful fiction that we could consider in terms of STEM for students as core audience. Also consider STEM lecturers as users of these stories, having that also in mind. Consider also in advance what feelings and dialogue might also emerge as people look at or read and analyze the stories that are being written. You want people to reflect on technologies which can be social in ways you think they need to or science and technology studies say they should. Why specifically your story? How would your story accomplish something that science and technology studies lecturers raising similar questions more precisely and more rigorously cannot? So these are some of the things to be able to think through and consider. I don't know whether it's me doing this, but if it's me, I will go ahead and do.
No,
Is that you?
Yes.
Gabriel?
Yes.
Over to you, Gabriel.
No, technically it's Florence.
Florence,
This is my bit. Yes.
Sorry, my bad.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah, no. So following on from that, again, kind of if we're rooting ourselves in the fundamental goal of the Applied African Speculative Fiction project, and we're trying to use narratives and as a method of interrogation, again, with the context that Christine very wonderfully expressed, the fact that this is still quite a wide, even the very field of critically evaluating technologies in itself is quite new, isn't consistently understood or valued or seen in the same way across very different contexts. With that in mind, it means that for anyone who is writing kind of speculative fiction from the African context or the Africanist context, I think there are some additional things following on from that and from what has just been spoken about the STEM student or the STEM policymaker as an audience, as a user. So so kind of put them in 5 basic points, right? So, I mean, the first is to retry as writers to consider other Africas, to kind of use one's imagination and one's research to consider not solely the Africa that you might have a direct, that one might have a direct might be one's direct context, although it's always useful to write about what you know, but you can still use your empathy to consider perhaps how particular settings, how particular technologies might work across the different settings that make up what Africa is. I think this is also kind of quite key to say as well, because, and actually it also comes out from something that Christine also mentioned about where it is that the field of STS, like critical understandings of science and technology, are kind of at the most defined, and it is in the Anglo-speaking context. And so as African or Africanist or writers of African descent, you know, we have to be very honest with ourselves that, quite frankly, in a lot of the Anglophone context outside Africa, there are often still very stereotypical ideas of what Africa actually is. I know there's many of us often say it's often the countrified continent, as it were. So as much as possible, taking advantage of this as an opportunity to really think about like those other Africas that often, and especially those that often aren't like as well expressed or discussed. So that may well mean the Africas that are perhaps rooted in different geographic or class-based perspectives, different religious perspectives. I always think it's really key to remember that whilst that there are many, many religions in the African continent, many very different like philosophical perspectives, but also think about those cultural or gendered perspectives which are different. And I think there's a real responsibility to do that as well, especially as we are considering the ways that so many of our governments are either using regressive policies or allowing certain like dynamics within society to kind of avoid deeper questions about how, for example, science and technology is used and connected with our communities in the African continent. So that's number one. Do try to think about those other Africas, as it were. From the perspective of the actual text itself, you know, also, you know, try to think critically and analyze critically, you know, your own writing, to thinking about the kind of like the tropes, the archetypes that are being used. Obviously, short stories are kind of their own format, and so in some ways, archetypes are actually very useful for a shorter format narrative. But I think it's also really important, again, thinking about the kind of context that these stories may well find themselves in, context where people might already, and well, will already have often quite singular notions of what Africa means. Like maybe think a bit more critically about like, what are the archetypes in these narratives, and what purpose are they actually serving? Like how many, as I said, like superstitious nagging housewives does one need? Or the tragic maiden from a Nollywood movie, you know, what value are they actually providing in that narrative? Thinking about like, you know, if these stories are here to help the policymakers of tomorrow, think seriously and critically about who gets affected and how. Like, well, what actually then is it that you're trying to get your readers to pay attention to and to think about, and what kind of archetypes and meta stories are you perhaps inadvertently portraying? So that's something as well to think about. Thirdly, you know, I think there's a lot to say about the power of format as well. So in the same way as, say, so similarly to how, say, even as has been mentioned before, you know, the field of critically thinking about science and technology, or the field, or even the ways of critically thinking about what it means to think about the African experience of science and technology. You know, sometimes it's also valuable to critically think about, well, what actually is it that the very format of these narratives can do? There's a power in that, I think. And so if one is kind of rooting that in the different African contexts, you know, there are many ways of telling stories. So really don't be afraid to be a little bit experimental, because one often finds that like actually even the way a story is formatted can itself be an opportunity for that kind of critical consideration of the themes within. From group courses to the masquerade traditions, like just play around and let that let that be reflected in one's prose. Like, don't be afraid of that. I mean, the other thing also not to be afraid of is language. You know, in many countries, you know, Nigeria, where my parents are from, where there's like 200 languages at least, like it's, you know, the multilinguality is kind of so innate and embedded that often we kind of take it for granted, even those in the diaspora, us can probably tell from my own accent. And so actually that's something not to be afraid of representing either. And even from that, again, thinking more seriously, given that the audience for this are STEM students, and particularly those who will be thinking about STEM in the context of how things can be built, how communities can be educated, that's going to be a very real thing that they will have to encounter. People will have to encounter the fact that a policy that's created for certain, even for one particular, you know, city in one particular African country, will have to accommodate for the fact that there may well be hundreds of languages spoken in a single street. Even if there may be one dominant language, you know, one still has to be politically sensitive and socially sensitive. So why not have that also be reflected in one's writing? Don't be afraid just to think that it has to be like English first and a particular kind of English as well. And then fifth and finally, don't be afraid overall to be just more experimental but more provocative. Not to get too deep, but if anyone's read the latest IPCC report, you know, we're not in a time where we can kind of afford to be gentle and go easy and be nice and polite. So why not demand a bit more of your audience? Be a bit challenging. You know, some of your audiences not only may be less familiar with critically thinking about science and technology, they may, as I said, less familiar with critically thinking about what Africa actually means in the 21st and indeed 22nd centuries. They might not even be fully aware of what the science fiction short story can be. So again, why not use this as an opportunity to further get into that? So yeah, those are some other considerations that I think could be quite useful for anyone in this space. And I will hand over back to Onesmus.
Oh, thanks, Florence. And sorry for meddling up with the it's been a long day. So yeah, so in terms of payment, as we've already alluded to earlier, in terms of the token, Imperial will send a form that needs to be completed for the claim, and this needs to be processed by July, after we've received the drafts. There is an exception of the 3 Kenyan stories that will be funded by the project that is led by Joe, the BRAID project. On contract, this will depend on the publisher that we go with. If it's MIT or the other publishers, with Joe and University of Sussex. We will be sending standard contracts at some point, perhaps later in the summer. The authors will also have to retain, the authors will retain all their rights. In terms of deadline, we're looking at drafts by 15th of July, and then final stories due in August or maybe slightly later, depending on how we sort of arrange it, as we arrange it. Next slide, I think that's Joe's.
Yeah, I wonder if I can just try sharing my screen. Might be easier because I don't think my slides have appeared there.
Sure.
In the meanwhile, can everybody please, and I mean everybody, whether you're presenting or listening, go into the chat if you are able to and say hello. Just type an introduction, say hi, just to kind of break the ice in the chat. And in this next section, I'm going to ask a couple questions, and you can feel free to answer those questions in the chat. You can also feel free to consider them to be rhetorical questions that you just answer in your head. Either one is fine. So I hope we are, here we go. Okay, so I'm here partly representing Sustainable AI Futures, which is a 3-year BRAID funded project led by Bath Spa University with many, many partners, including Afro Futures UK. Florence is here today. And it's really just kind of getting started. It's a project that looks at AI and sustainability, environmental sustainability, from a really interdisciplinary perspective. And as part of that, we have this fantastic opportunity to collaborate with applied African speculative fiction. So my question for you, my first question is, when you think of AI, what have you heard about it that is good? And what have you heard about AI that is not so good? What are the promises and perils of AI? What's the first things that come to mind? So I'd invite everybody just to take a moment and to think about something, whether it's obvious or whether it's unusual, and just write it in the chat. What are some of the promises of AI? What are some of the good features, and what are some of the risks, the pitfalls, the perils? So some of the kind of perils and challenges and risks that have been getting a lot of press recently are the environmental impacts of artificial intelligence. So data centers for artificial intelligence use up a lot of energy and a lot of water, and there's a lot of embodied carbon in building out that infrastructure in the first place. You can see in the sustainability reports of the major AI companies, such as Microsoft, the climate pledges that they made a few years ago have been completely missed. The line is going up instead of down, as it should be. And they're saying, well, this is because we didn't know that there was going to be AI. AI means that we need to be using more energy, more resources, and that's why we haven't been able to get our carbon emissions under control. But it's okay, they'll tell us, because AI also has various potential applications to address climate change and tackle environmental problems. Now, there's some truth in that. But there's also a lot of uncertainty about these potential applications and a lot of unsubstantiated hype. And at the moment, it's very difficult to kind of weigh the pros and the cons against each other. There aren't standardized methodologies, for example, to really footprint what the environmental impact of an AI system might be. So we're exploring that kind of territory in this project, and this is building on an earlier report that, if you're interested in diving into this particular topic, you might want to have a look at, called The Cloud and the Climate. That's just the environmental impacts, of course, and actually in some ways the environmental impacts of artificial intelligence are probably easier to get your head around. There are big buildings, there's lots of energy and resources being used. We can imagine how that might do some kind of harm to the planet or to communities. Some of the misgivings around the environment, I think, are actually standing in for broader, more nebulous, more difficult to express misgivings and societal anxieties around AI. Maybe it has to do with work. Is it going to take my job? Or maybe it will just sort of change my job. How will it change my life? Will it change my personality if I use ChatGPT, for example, to do all my writing and thinking and decision making for years and years and years? Now, maybe science fiction gives us some tools and resources to kind of think through those futures, but maybe science fiction hasn't actually been delivering what it needs to when it comes to AI. This is my view. It's not, I don't know how kind of widely held it is, but I've expressed it in this paper, Machine Learning in Contemporary Science Fiction, and I'm happy to kind of share that resource for anyone who's interested in this idea that science fiction, actually, the way science fiction traditionally, historically has talked about AI has proven to be more of a distraction when we've had this most recent wave of AI systems, more of a distraction than it has a guide. And that's because science fiction writers have been really interested in ideas like, will AI become conscious? Will AI kind of turn into some sort of deity and take over the world, or kind of escape as a blue crackling electrical light? That means that there's been a distraction from the kinds of harms perhaps that AI has actually been inflicting, the kinds of exploitation that AI has actually depended on, and the kind of tricky, knotty, difficult problems about weighing up costs and benefits, recognizing unintended side effects and so on. So maybe we can change that less than honorable tradition in science fiction. Maybe we can write some science fiction that really talks about AI as it actually exists, rather than this kind of Hollywood version of artificial intelligence. So if we think a little bit about how policymakers think about artificial intelligence, there's a kind of quite standard line across quite a lot of different national jurisdictions with, you know, some variations. But what do you think? What characteristics should responsible AI, should good artificial intelligence have? What is AI that is worth wanting? And again, if you feel like it, pop something into the chat, type something, those of you who feel like you would like to. What characteristics should responsible AI or good AI have? So we often see these sorts of taxonomies of characteristics. The AI should be fair and unbiased, interpretable and explainable, accountable, robust and reliable, and that really means that it should keep doing what it's supposed to do, even as the circumstances change, and private and secure. It shouldn't be leaking your data. That might be a good start, but how might we go further in reimagining AI? That's one of the things that Sustainable AI Futures is interested in, and it might be something that you're interested in writing your fiction as well. How might we go further in reimagining AI, in AI that is worth wanting, in AI that is good, not bad? And we might decide that some of these characteristics really don't go far enough. So, you know, who decides? Okay, so this AI is explainable and interpretable, but to whom? Who's doing the explaining, and who's listening to the explanation? And is the explanation really scratching the itch? Is it really fulfilling the need? Accountable in what ways? Could there be AI systems that actually tick all these boxes and yet are still harmful? So to go a bit further and kind of think about responsible AI or good AI in a broader way, we should be thinking about the political economy of AI and the material basis of AI, and that includes things like AI-driven demand for resources. For example, the DRC has the world's largest cobalt supply. Geopolitics is being reshaped by the political economy of AI. We should also be thinking about the baseline scenario. In other words, I think sometimes when you hear all this kind of policy and regulation and AI ethics talk, what you get is this idea that things were fair, unbiased, accountable, everything was fine, and AI has come along and we just have to make sure that AI doesn't spoil things. And that's not the world that we live in. We don't just need to protect the status quo. We need to think about how to continue projects of transformation, projects of justice seeking in an era of AI. We want to think about who owns AI. Most AI systems are developed in companies that are based in the US and China. They have operations and stakeholders all over the world, but that's where their base is. Data from the global north is also overrepresented in AI training sets, which is a kind of complex, interesting thing. On the one hand, there's a problem there, about being underrepresented. On the other hand, there's possibly a problem about data extractivism and maybe not wanting your data to be taken and used to train these US and Chinese-based proprietary systems. And of course, the US, China, and to some extent Europe are also dominating how we approach the governance and regulation of AI. Another aspect is really to put human labor a little bit more at the center of our thinking about AI, rather perhaps than just profit-making, the experience of workers. AI processes don't just kind of replace human processes, they usually transform them in various ways. So what does AI mean for the lived experience of various stakeholders? I think just for the sake of time, I'll probably skip these slides, but they'll be available. They're kind of continuing this question of how we might go beyond the cliched, by now cliched understandings of what responsible AI looks like. And one of these points, at least, has already been made by Christine, that the futures that we imagine about AI, they have real effects in the present, whether or not they come true. They have kind of performativities. So one last little question here. What are you thinking? What are you thinking? When I kind of rattle through that little spiel about artificial intelligence, the environment, the potential harms of AI, the potential benefits of AI, ways of governing, of regulating AI, and the shortcomings of those modes of regulation, and the question of where they're generated and in whose interests they serve, that could be very, very fertile ground, I think, for fiction. So what are you thinking? Do any ideas come to mind? Any story ideas? If they do, you could pop them in the chat, or you could keep them to yourself for now. So my final little point is to switch gears a little bit. I myself have done some collaboration where I've been an expert working with a writer, or a writer working with an expert. And I've kind of encountered two models, both of which are fine, but I think one of them is better. And the first model is that the writer has some kind of idea, and then the expert comes along and refines it and gives you the language you need, the concepts you need, points out some kind of flaws in the ideas, and then the writer goes away and writes the story, and the story is all the better for it. It's more kind of plausible. It is more intelligible to experts in the field, and so on. That's great. That's a good starting point. But I think even better is if you can get to a deeper collaboration in which the writer learns enough to start becoming a little bit of an expert, and maybe even more importantly, the expert begins to feel creative as well. The expert begins to feel inspired and says, well, oh, we had this idea, but actually maybe it could be this instead. What if we added in this extra complication? What if it wasn't this but that? And so the expert becomes a little bit of a writer. Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to collaborating as we go on. And who am I passing over to then?
Thanks, Joe. I think you're passing it over to Stephen, yeah, and Christine.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. I'm here.
Question,
Over
should
to
we do
you.
a short 5-minute break just for breathing
Yeah, I think that would be good. So yeah, if we can
before we start our stuff?
come back in.
Okay.
in
That
5
sounds
minutes.
like a good idea. Yeah, so maybe for 5 minutes or something like that.
Yeah.
5 minutes.
great. Okay.
Thank you.
Shall I start, Onesmus?
Over to you. Yes, we should go ahead. Go ahead. Over to you.
And if anyone wants to put their camera on, I'm very happy to see faces, but don't feel you have to. So I'm going to do a kind of a little bit of a canter through applied sci-fi from my perspective, kind of pulling on the last 10 years that me and Christine have been working together, and just give some examples of some of the projects and all that kind of stuff. I think the thing that I should start off by saying is this is my view, this is how I've come at it, this is my experience. I think you'll probably spot there are places in these slides that differ from some of the things Joe said, some things that Florence has said. I think personally, I think that's absolutely brilliant and fine, because even in my own experience of the projects I've involved in, they're all different. They involve people, they involve different things, so in different contexts. And so what I'm saying is I really don't want people to think that I'm saying this is how you do it, because I'm really not. What I'm saying is this is how I've done it, and this is how me and Christine have done it. So please hear it in that kind of way. So I'll kind of go into how I see applied sci-fi. So a little while ago, I was asked if I could go to some dinner event thing, and could I do a 2-minute presentation on applied science fiction, which kind of is quite tricky, really. But this is the slide I came up with, because I think at a basic level this kind of explains it. So what I'm suggesting here is that a story has kind of two lives, if you like, two lives. There's the one where it's being created, and there's the one where it's being read or heard and passed on and interpreted. And that's fiction. So if we're creating a story, as you'll know, you're thinking about the narrative, you're thinking about characters, you're thinking about the world building. So pulling on some of the stuff that Florence was talking about, you're kind of doing that bit. Then you release it, you publish it, you read it out, you perform it, whatever it is, and it's received. It will be interpreted. That story will mean different things to different people, and you hope that it's also passed on, and then it's received and interpreted, etc., etc. So that's my two kind of life cycles, so to speak. Where I think the applied bit comes in is that you insert, I've put expert here, but we've started using the phrase subject specialist, because actually everybody's an expert in something. But basically your scientists, your technologists, if you're doing it in a community, it might be residents, but you're inserting an expertise into the building of that story. And you're also inserting an expertise into the receiving of that story. So what we try to do is kind of bring a conversation either onto the page or into the kind of real world. So that might be a panel that includes the stories and the experts. It might be a book where the experts respond to the ideas in the stories in the book, and I'll give some examples a bit later. But in essence, I think that's what we're doing. We're writing science fiction or speculative fiction, and we're inserting expertise both into the creation and particularly into the interpretation of that story. So I can't remember who's doing the slides, but if we could have the next one, that would be great. Brilliant. So these are kind of 5 principles that we try to work to. Just to reiterate my caveat at the beginning, these are not set in stone by any means at all. But one of the things that we try to emphasize as we get into these projects with different people is that this is about foresight, not forecast or prediction. And what I mean by that is this is about opening up ideas. It's not about closing them down so you're predicting a particular future. This is about trying to open up conversations, open up debate, open up ideas, give people hooks from which they can then do that kind of interpretation, that reading, that questioning. So that's one of our first principles, and believe me, lots of people want you to get into prediction, which may be something you're doing in a particular project, but I've tried to avoid it. This second one, create a level playing field between all participants, really is pulling on what I was saying before, which is everybody who's involved is an expert. So that one's there particularly when we work with communities and we work with residents, where there can be a feeling that the scientists are kind of somehow more knowledgeable or above the kind of the residents, where actually, if you're talking about what an area might look like in the future, geographical area, well, actually the people that live there and are kind of part of that area have as much expertise, if not more, about the future of that area. But it's important, I think, to keep that in mind, that you're trying to create that level playing field, so it's not a talking to exercise. And the third one then is really linked to that. I think you have to be quite active in how you do that. You can't just assume that will happen. Now, this project's slightly different because you're pairing up rather than kind of doing it in a workshop format and all that. But that's something we keep in mind when we are running workshops and bringing different types of people together. We have a thing where the scientists or technologists, but basically the people who are there in a professional capacity, can veto ideas. So the reason we've introduced this, I'm not suggesting you have to, is that because we want the experts to be involved in that second life cycle, we don't want to put them in a position where they can't sit on the stage with the story, where they can't have their name associated with the story. Now, I'll give you an example of that later, but I've put in brackets in the extreme because this is not about, I don't think that would happen. This is like, that idea is so toxic, I will not sit next to it. And then finally, and this is where maybe it's a bit blurry with what you were saying, Joe, but I think this is the way we approach it anyhow, that the authors have editorial control of the story. So the story is theirs, it's their name against it, and they have that editorial control. So that's kind of the 5 big things that we tend to keep in mind. Can we have the next one? So in terms of developing the idea, so that left hand side of the first slide. So the way we tend to approach it is, if we do have scientists and tech people, or indeed people from the community, we ask them to identify some input materials, some sort of inspiration, things to read, things to get the brain working. Now, if you're doing a one-to-one pairing, you might, that might be quite informal. Ones we've tended to do, certainly with big groups, has been too many people to manage to kind of do that on the one-to-one. But anyhow, you need some inspiration to start things going. Then what we tend to do is, the author will generate some ideas of what the story is about, what the messages are. So again, pulling from a lot of the stuff that Florence was talking about, like, what are you trying to do with this? What is it? And that's where we tend to have the big sort of collaboration and throwing around ideas. So before the story has started forming, but as part of the here's an idea, and oh, what about this as an idea? And so the sort of thing that Joe was talking about there, I think, although I think we might do it a bit earlier than Joe was saying. So you need, in terms of developing the ideas, you need engaging stories, obviously. Like, this has to be to a certain extent, this has to be entertaining, otherwise everyone's just going to stop listening. But you also need the hooks in there for the messages, so that you can kind of build out from them if you're using it in your STS teaching, or however you're using it. You need those kind of hooks. I think it's probably really important, however you kind of divide up roles and responsibilities, that it's clear at the beginning what they are. So I've had experience of where that's not been clear, of people either kind of rewriting my story, or just saying, I have no idea why I'm here or what I'm meant to be doing, because we haven't kind of set it up early enough on, whatever that might look like. Certainly the way we approach it is that the scientist stroke technologist, blah blah blah, is there for checking and kind of inspiring plausibility and possible science. Stress possible there. They can disagree, and because we're either on stage with them or they're commenting in a book, they can disagree, and we encourage them to disagree with the ideas, because this is about a conversation, this is about a debate. Talks about the toxic ideas, that they're not critiquing or editing the story, and they have no more expertise on human nature and everything that goes with that than you do as an author. So that's kind of how we look at developing the ideas. On to the next one, which is around developing the story itself. So I think we might have gone 2 there, didn't we? Developing the story. Yes, this one. Excellent. So So what we would do is we get to a point where we're kind of okay about the ideas. We kind of know the ideas. We've got a sense of what science or what politics or what ethics we're kind of building into this, and then we draft a story, and that's where we then go back to check for plausibility. Depending on your scientist, depending on who they are, how busy they are, how much they want to be involved, will obviously depend on how iterative that can be. My experience is everybody I think I've worked with has been really keen to be as involved as possible. Sometimes that's more limited than others, but it's not usually from a lack of wanting to. Now this next line, I always sort of hesitate about putting this in. So I'm often asked when I do talks about this, so do you find there's any constraints with doing this sort of work? And personally, I think there is, because you can be like brilliant, be imaginative, be creative, make it wonderful, and all the rest of that. But at the end of the day, you're doing it for a purpose, which is to be used as a way of raising the ethical debate around certain things. So I think keeping that in mind whilst you're doing it can sometimes be a bit limiting in terms of how loose you might let your imagination go. It's a balance, and as I say, every project is different. Some of this is really obvious, it's short fiction, so you can't include everything. However, the brilliant thing about doing this with fiction is, as people have kind of said already, is that you're situating something in sort of real stroke recognizable life. So your world does need to be quite rounded, even if you're not bringing all of that into your short story. This is pretty obvious for short story writers. Don't overburden people with characters or a world that is so dense that they can't grasp it in the time they've got in terms of the reading. Yeah, your final story should reflect obviously the combined expertise of everyone involved. This slide went a bit wrong, actually. There should be sort of line breaks after this. It's going to be used by an audience, and what we've found is the audience here, whether this is in workshop form or big public debates or people who are reading stuff, is it gives them a way of distancing themselves from their personal situation, so they can talk about a topic through the story. So that's something to bear in mind as well. And the scientists can use it to situate their own work and discuss how their work might be or might not get used. Early on, and then when I started doing this, I used to ask the scientists, so if you're successful, how does the world change? Which I stopped doing because it's a really unfair question, because obviously they're focused on solving the next problem in the particular field they're working in. They're not thinking about, oh, how might this change the world? Some are, but not everybody, and that's kind of fair enough. I think what's come through from the people that we've worked with is that they really, really, really enjoy having an opportunity to step back and think about how their work might be in the broader world and how it might interact with other things. And there's somebody at King's College, Liz Black, that we work with, who's like, you might think we get to do this all the time. We don't. This is a really great opportunity to take that step back. So it's just worth keeping all this stuff in mind, I think, when you're doing, without, I'm not trying to overdo it, but it's all kind of there in the background. Okay, and next, so what I thought I'd do is kind of to kind of wrap this bit up before Christine does a little bit, is just to give you some bit more concrete ideas of some of the projects we've been involved in and how they differ, because they, as I say, they do all differ. So the first one that we did was with the European Human Brain Project and Bristol Robotics Lab. The way we did that, 3 of us as authors, plus Christine and her colleague, we went to the Bristol Robotic Lab for the day. They showed us around, we talked to them, we asked lots of questions, they showed us different parts of the lab, we sat around in the room for about an hour afterwards, and that's where we took the inspiration from the stories that we then read, and were on a panel with the roboticists at the Bristol Literary Festival. One of the key things for me that came out of that was, in that conversation towards the end of the day, I can't remember who asked the question, but we were talking about how bleak, how dystopian can these stories be, or should they be? And we asked the question of the roboticists, like, are you wanting everything to be really positive? Are you kind of, are you in some tech utopian kind of world? Or how do we manage, the first one we did, how do we manage this sitting on stage with you and all the rest of it? And forgive me if these are programs and films you're not aware of, but the response was, Black Mirror's fine, Terminator is not. So to give you the context, that Black Mirror is quite bleak, it's quite dystopian, but it asks, well, certainly in those, this is like 10 years ago, so it's the early Black Mirror, it asked questions, it kind of raised issues. They were fine with that. What they were not prepared to sit on stage with was a robot apocalypse. Partly because I think they felt that they got burnt an awful lot by mainstream media, and anybody ever talked to them about what they were up to, it was always like, oh, so there's going to be a robot apocalypse, is there? So again, sort of picking up on what Joe was asking questions around earlier on the, what are the positives? Doesn't have to be utopian, doesn't have to be naive, but something that's asking questions that's sort of based more in reality. And I think one of the brilliant things that I realized on that first project was such a good opportunity to actually talk to the people who are really doing this. So if you are trying to research stuff, you're actually sitting there with the people who are doing the cutting edge stuff. It's great. Second project listed here is a digital psychiatry project with King's College London, again with Christine. Very briefly, that project it's a research project looking at, can you train an AI to analyze what a mother says about a child in order to predict the future mental health of the child? So lots and lots of technical issues, lots and lots of ethical issues, kind of beyond the technology as well. With that one, I spent a lot of time in team meetings talking to both the AI people and the clinical psychologists. Me and Christine had a kind of interview schedule with them, and we, through that process, I mean, it's a long process, so I haven't really got time to describe it all, but through that process, we've kind of settled more and more on what are the questions, what are the ethical questions that we want the stories to raise, and that was in conversation with Christine, but also with the people working on the project. So that was a kind of quite an intense back and forward. We even ran workshops with people not involved with the project, clinical psychologists, I think it was mothers of autistic children. I can't remember which workshop came where, but even to formulate the ideas and the ethical bits that were going to be in the story, we put a lot of effort in. 2 stories, and they're linked in there's an additional resources kind of slide. They're linked so you can take a look at them with a lot of this stuff. We then have been out and about with those 2 stories probably for a couple of years in public events and workshops. that had, you know, it's similar in some ways to the first one, but very different in terms of the amount of time spent with the actual project. The third one I'll just touch on because again it's very different. This was to create a book of 5 sections around things like the future of police and justice, the future of money, the future of aging, I think was one. Each of these had 5 stories and then 2 experts commenting in the book on the stories, but the process was relatively similar in that those experts gave some materials. We then had workshops with experts and authors around one of the sections. There was then a to and fro between the ideas and the stories and finally a book. The reason I kind of bring that one in is a couple of, so an anecdote which I like about this is that we in the future of money, it wasn't called that, it was called something much grander than that, but anyhow, the future of money, we had 2 experts, both who write, I think one writes for Forbes, one writes for Bloomberg. You know, they know their stuff. First author pitched their ideas, you know, I'm thinking about this, and the first expert says, no, there's no way on earth that would ever happen. That is not plausible. I cannot see how that would happen at all. It's a really bad idea, etc., etc. I really felt for the author, but you know, this was the process. Second expert says, oh, I can actually absolutely see how that could happen. That's very plausible. And what I really liked about that was you've got 2 people who really know their stuff, but because they're thinking ahead, thinking into the future, nothing's set. So again, this idea of you're opening things up, that's what really pleased me about that particular moment. There's lots of anecdotes from that particular project. But so I think, I mean, that's a very, it might not have felt like it, but it's a very quick skim over the top of what we've been up to. And you know, just to reiterate again, every project's different, and this is just the way we've been doing it. So yeah, Christine, do you want to pick up from there?
Yes, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, on the last one, I wrote the postface to the volume, which is really a reflection on how foresight work sort of aligns with applied science fiction, and I've uploaded it. Well, I've created actually in the Google folder that is, I think, shared between everybody, where there are the slides. I've created a folder called, I think, Resources, Christine and Stephen, or something like that, and I've uploaded a bunch of files there that I couldn't properly link to the presentation. So that said, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so like Stephen said earlier, there are 2 lives of the stories, and the second one is the kind of public life of the stories. And in applied science fiction, it involves some kind of expertise, some kind of specialist, you know, involved into their second life. And in the project that we are part of now at this point, you know, that is being launched, it's going to be used for teaching to STEM students. So I'm just going to give you a few pointers actually to some of the stuff that I have uploaded in the folder, on which are examples of how you can use speculative fiction for teaching. So the kind of teaching that a speculative fiction story may be good for is definitely the STS personally speaking, critical thinking on specific topics, and also to introduce certain concepts that, you know, notably STS friendly concepts to STEM students. Like, for instance, you know, notions of socio-technical imaginaries, notions of environmental injustice, social justice, health justice, notions of decolonial studies, notions of gender, race, queer, intersectional studies, notions of labor studies that we are using in STS as various lenses to look at socio-technical systems in society. I'm just going to take an example, which is an extract, actually, from a speculative fiction short story of which I am the author, because at some point, like Joe was saying earlier, the expert can become, the scientist can become the writer. I think like about 2 years in collaborating with Stephen, we swapped hats, and I actually submitted a speculative fiction story of my own to a project, well, something he was organizing with Virtual Futures Salon, which were near future fictions evenings, where they selected stories that were to be read in public, and that was a kind of terrifying experience to read my own fiction in public. But the reason I initially wrote this short story in 2017, I was at the time a full-time social scientist, STS scientist, integrated in the European Human Brain Project, which was this huge European flagship project called the Human Brain Project. And I wrote a story about a bipolar cognitive computer / artificial intelligence, because the project I was in, we were always talking about standard brains, which is absolutely meaningless. And of course, the kind of standard brain that was modeled was never a brain with mental illnesses. It was overall the brain of an average white male scientist, middle-aged, which was exactly the profile of the neuroscientist in the project. So I wrote this story, and I decided to use the medium of speculative fiction because I wanted to capture some of the frustration and critical questioning that I had towards the Human Brain Project, but that I could not write about and publish about in an academic paper for reasons of professional ethics, and also for not antagonizing my colleagues in the Human Brain Project that I had to work with anyway. And so the story eventually found its way in a chapter in an edited volume, and it's there, which is called the Tablet Stroker Redux, and it's a chapter in an edited volume called Mapping the Posthuman. And can I have the next slide, please? And I just want to show this, and it's probably impossible to read, but just to show that in this particular story, and the way I presented it when I wrote the chapter for Mapping the Posthuman, was really to reflect critically on what I had put into the story. And there was a context, but I reproduced here some of the sections of the stories, and in the margins are the kind of STS questioning that I put into it, which you can look at as an example of the kind of critical questioning that can be done. So, for instance, for me, the labor conditions were of scientists in neoliberal societies were central to the stories. Like, the wages are not, in my story, the wages are not commensurate with individual skills or the work that is provided, but they depend on the profit that is generated for the employer, which here is a kind of international brain project, very different from the one I was in. But and there was all these questions of de-skilling scientists, of de-skilling jobs, of and much debated questions in related to AI, around AI taking our jobs. But in this particular case, AI is not taking our jobs, but actually the AI and the scientists are all submitted to the same regime of labor exploitation. And actually, in the case of the AI, which is mentally ill because it's actually bipolar, there is an exploitation of a vulnerable being in question. So this kind of STS questioning is here illustrated alongside the story, but it's an example of how someone who is one of the experts can start raising questions around a story to use it for teaching. Can I have the next slide, please? And I've uploaded the chapter because actually it's behind a paywall until June, but I can share it, for teaching resources and so on. So it's in the folder. So the stories can also be used to raise techno-moral questions, so not STSC questions, because usually STS is looking a lot at socio-technical systems, so it comes, it's a very sociological questioning of structures, of social structures, to make it really very simplistic, whereas techno-moral questions and classical ethical frameworks are more going to take individual perspectives on things, and that's a very, very kind of blunt and not refined distinction. But I want to point that out because there are, I've put two examples of papers. One, there is a link to the paper which is in open access, where Burton and colleagues in 2015 make the argument that there is value in using sci-fi for teaching the ethics of AI. And they went on, mostly the same authors, to publish in 2023 this big textbook, which is called Computing and Technology Ethics, Engaging Through Science Fiction. And as a textbook, it is absolutely oriented towards practical teaching. And the last part of the book, if, I don't know, if Imperial College manages to buy it and share it with, I don't know, electronically, but the last part of the book is a story bank of sci-fi, of speculative fiction stories, each accompanied by a short introduction, framing the story, and a set of study questions. And can I have the next slide? Thank you. Here I've just reproduced in this slide and the next one, the story frame that is being used for one of the story. And I picked this story because it's been written by Wole Talabi, who's the regression test, who was actually, we've been following like a thread since the beginning of the presentation. But the story frame and the story questions, can you give me the next slide, please? Because I'm not going to read it to you, but all this is uploaded in the folder. So, well, I accessed the book through King's because it's not an open access book. And I've downloaded 3 of the stories with their framing introductions and study questions so that I could share them with you as examples in the folder of how speculative fiction can be used for teaching ethics. But of course, I'm limiting on the number of pages I'm allowed to download for teaching and so on. So I downloaded 3 stories. They are there to be used as examples. If you can manage to get your hands on the book, there are a lot more in there. Can I have the next slide, please? About framing the stories and proposing questions. This is the key part of preparing stories for teaching. It can be done by the author, and it's probably better to have an STS-related or an ethics-related specialist do it, or do it in collaboration with the author, to link elements of the story with critical analysis. And why is it so? I would say, well, our joint experience with Stephen is that I've theorized a lot what he came at more intuitively. And also we each have our skills, our expertise, our experience, our specialties, and the difference in perspectives that, you know, can come by confronting those different visions on the story can bring a lot of richness and depth to how the story is used as a springboard for critical reflection. And for this, I'm using as an example, one of the first collaborations, it was not, one of the first experiments we did in response to a story which was me responding to a short story by Stephen called The Thrown Away Things, which was a very short story, and I did a very short response. And they are both, my response and Stephen's short story are both, again, in the folder for you to look at. And can I have the next slide, please? Yes, that's my response, and I'm not going to read to you now, but just this is what it looks like. It's in the folder, and I explain how how Stephen is what I have pulled out from Stephen's story. Very STSC topics, and actually that could be definitely used if they are put into a question form, to use his story for teaching to STEM students with some STS reflection in it. Can I have the other slide, please? So there is a very important reason for taking the pain to contextualize and frame a story with a short introduction, and then for proposing a series of questions. And it's that the story is going, in that case, it's going to be used in seminars for teaching by STEM lecturers or teaching assistants who probably are not going to be overly familiar with the topics that are being taught, because that's not their area of specialty. And you need to give them all the elements they need to prepare for the teaching. So, so can I have the next slide, please? So the example I have put up here, which is, again, in the folder, is an example from the work I did with my colleagues in 2014 in the Foresight Lab at King's College London. We were preparing for a foresight exercise in the Human Brain Project around the kind of future brain medicine that the Human Brain Project was aiming to contribute to. And we did produce 6 socio-technical narrative scenarios, short stories of debatable quality, but short stories based on our work with the scientists, again, with interviews, with desk literature review, and so on. And we accompanied each of the scenario for being used in workshops with actually scientists who were totally ignorant and willingly ignorant of the kind of topics we wanted to discuss. So we accompanied each of the scenarios with a short introduction, and at the end, avenues for discussion. So for example, this particular scenario which is up there, the medical informatics platform of the Human Brain Project has been highly successful in identifying brain signatures of neurological disorders, especially some dementias, and some pre-symptomatic tests are coming into routine clinical practice to identify those forms of cognitive impairment. And now, they could be likely to progress with dementia. And a group of researchers working with the Human Brain Project now has claimed to be able to identify the disease signature of depressive disorders. And they are proposing that this is going to be developed into a screening test to be used in early adolescence. So in a way, a lot of intersection with the digital psychiatry project we did later on with Stephen. And so the university has put out a very optimistic press release claiming that depression has been proved to be a brain disease. Tests developed by our researchers can now predict who will get depressed, and a new generation of drugs is just around the corner. And so that was the scenario, the base of the scenario. And then we wrote this kind of short story. And then we say, okay, the scenario does consider some of the routes to success, including those involving aggregation of data from a range of sources outside European hospitals. And then we use this to say, the kind of questions you could ask, like, to what extent are the controversies suggested in the scenario realistic? If so, what are the best routes to address them? What might be the implications of developing screening, when only probabilistic indicators are actually came up with, and so on. So contextualizing the story to be used, in this kind of, you need to really bound it in the way it can be used for teaching, because you are going to put them in the hands of teachers who are not trained in STS or ethics. That's the bottom line. So all these examples are in the folders. So feel free to go and download them and read them. And if ever you have questions to ask, just email me. I mean, that's fine, no problem. Or Stephen, for the matter. And that's it for me. I think, yeah, that's the last slide. That's more resources. So the ones that are not linked are in the folder. And otherwise, Stephen has added a number of links to resources from his website and from other places. Okay, and I think the next step is going to be questions. So I'm handing over to Onesimus again.
Yes, thank you very much, Christine and Stephen and Joe, and also Florence, for that input. And we open it to questions. So if there are any questions, I think Noreen, did you write something about you would like to meet an expert before you outline in the chat, or did I was in my own things?
Sort of question that I had there is, and I mean, look, I'm quite used to doing collaborative writing with people. I mean, I do ghostwriting for a living, and I sort of have worked in shared world situations. The question that I have is, obviously, Paulina has sort of mentioned to me that she's actually given, I think she's given me 2 people as possible partners. So I'm assuming then that we would then formalize that meeting with the people, maybe set up a face-to-face, depending on if you're in the same city, or just a video call just to sort of touch base with them, find out a little bit more about their project, what their concerns are for their project, because I mean, obviously they are people that feel quite strongly about what they're doing. And then take from there, I suppose, and come up with an outline, run it past them for plausibility, and then just get cracking with the writing, I suppose, if I'm right in assuming that.
Yeah, that's definitely the plan. We're waiting for Amber, who is our friend in the connection, to return from leave before we connect you. So hopefully in the next week or 2 weeks. But everybody else, all the other writers are already been paired up and know exactly who they're collaborating with. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's something that we will sort of get done, and perhaps try to get it done sooner rather than later. But I think what you've said really resonates with what we've been discussing in terms of, getting the ball rolling based on what Christine and Joe and Stephen and also Florence were alluding to in the presentation. So getting those conversations going and getting sort of a right framework on what you want to write. That sort of works in that sense. So yeah, we'll endeavor to do that. I don't know from the panel, is there anything that you would like to say, or to Noreen? Heads are being shaken, so that perhaps it means but I think that I don't know whether that satisfies you, that the approach that we are taking. Any other question? Yes, go ahead. Unmute and speak. Memia? Yeah, please go ahead. We can't hear you. I think it might be muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Kimemia. Go ahead.
My question was, we had written proposals outlining our ideas in regards to how we interpreted the topic. When we begin to collaborate with experts, Stephen has mentioned that a situation may occur where the story, the expert is not ready to move forward with the story. I think my question is, are we bound to work within the confines of the proposals that we had sent, or how flexible are we in the development of the story versus the original stories that we had pitched, the original ideas that we had pitched rather? I don't know if my question is understood.
Yeah, so I think you're completely free from the proposal. I mean, that is my, yeah. Joe, yeah?
Yeah.
Joe is really the main editor. I know you people
That's not
have been corresponding with me. Yeah, it's true.
I agree.
Trust me.
I guess the only thing is that the purpose that there should be, you know, use within STEM education is the guiding principle. But yeah, you know, the proposals are all fantastic, but through encountering a subject specialist, you may well get ideas that excite you even more. So yeah, you're free.
I've certainly experienced that, where I've started talking to the specialist, and there was one in All Tomorrow's Futures where I was started talking about my ideas, and they kind of fell flat. But then spent an afternoon with one of the specialists, kind of developing what was going on in my head and their head into sort of a similar but not the same ideas. It was great. I mean, that was a really good experience. So I know that's not within the frame of what you're allowed to do, but yeah, I found that a very good thing to do.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kimemia. I don't know, well, is there anything else to add there, Florence and Christine, in terms of the mechanics of how to go about things from Kimemia's question? But if not, then are there any more questions? Are there any more questions from the group? Good. It seems I haven't looked at the chat. Yeah, so yeah, Noreen says she's flexible. Muna, we haven't had you speak. Do you want to say something, introduce yourself and say something?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mona, and I think many of the yeah, hi Noreen, I see you waving. Many of the writers are from the African Speculative Fiction Society, where I work as the administrator. So to your question, actually, no, I don't have anything to add. I mean, it's been an exciting presentation. And thank you all for the illustrative aspects also of this presentation. I think it gave everyone a kind of more realistic idea of what to expect and some of the challenges, but also those great opportunities for collaboration, which is super exciting. And I look forward to reading all this fantastic output that's going to come out of this. So yeah, congratulations everyone for getting to the stage of the project, and the momentum is going. So brilliant.
Yeah, thanks, Muna. Yeah, it's really a milestone, and I'm really happy to play a small part of this process as well. So thank you. Yeah, so if there are no more questions, I just want to then take this opportunity to thank all our speakers for today, Christine, Stephen, Joe, and Florence, and everyone else who's managed to say something or participate in this writers workshop today. So I wish you all the best. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon, wherever you are. There is a question from Christine, hand raised.
it's not exactly a question, but just to reiterate, I mean, if there are questions coming our way, just, you know, I suppose they will come to you or Paulina. Just forward them to us, and I suppose I'm speaking for both Stephen and I. We will be happy to answer them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Especially when it comes, I mean, it's because the kind of preparing the stories for teaching is going to be a later stage.
Yeah.
So when it comes to that, happy to answer questions, even if it's in 6 months or so. No worries.
Well, thank you very much for that offer. And yes, we will take that into consideration, Christine and Stephen. Yeah, thank you very much. But yeah, enjoy the rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you at another event soon. Thank you very much. Bye for now. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.